Fairy Tale Fathers, a one-act play by John Freed. What kind of father leaves his children wandering in the dark woods and flies off a hungry owl? Cast of characters, the narrator, and I'll be reading the prologue and the epilogue. Paul Roeder is Hans, the German accented woodsman father of Hansel and Gretel in his 40s. George is Sean, the Irish accented tavern owner, formerly known as Jack the Giant Killer in his 60s.
Yeah.
David is Lord Ella, the French accented nobleman and father of Cinderella in his 50s. Kathleen is Candy Householder, the Russian accented witch from Hansel and Gretel in her 30s. The setting is a kebab, a country tavern near Imperial Russia's Odessa in December at the end of the 18th century. In the corner is a cast iron stove which struggles to heat the space. Sean takes a log off the bar and carefully adds it to the dwindling fire. Hans is sitting at the bar with a number of small logs in a canvas carrier on the stool next to him. He's balancing a full jigger shot glass in one hand and a full beer stein in the other. He knocks the shot back and quickly chases it with the beer.
Again.
Hans places another log on the bar from the carrier, and Sean gives him a handful of beans before refilling the shot glass and the stein.
Your change.
Hans carefully puts the beans in his pocket. Sean adds that log to the fire as well. Hans quickly downs the shot and the beer chaser. Reaching for another log.
Again.
Not till you tell me what's troubling you.
I left my little Hansel and Gretel alone in the most desolate part of the forest.
How could you do such a thing?
Blame it on the endless famine and their stepmother. Yesterday was her last straw, and my children discovered a hoard of food under the floorboards. They had pulled out a loaf of bread and were attempting to cut it with their sharpest knife. The bread did not want to be cut. Even my axe just bounced off of it. When my wife returned, she shrieked as if she had seen the floor covered with rats. That night, she whispered to me how she was going to solve the problem. She'd wrap the children tightly in a burlap and toss them into the river like a sack full of puppies. She was certain that the river would properly dispose of them in the sea.
So what did you do?
I woke very early this morning and took the children into the darkest part of the woods. Blindfolded them and told them to count to 100. Then I ran away as fast as my legs would carry me. Who knows? The fairies might take pity on them. Or they'll mercifully die in their sleep from the cold night air. Either way, it's no longer my fault.
Maybe you made the wrong decision. What did your wife say when you returned without the children?
Not a word. I simply showed her my axe, which I had covered with blood from a stumbling deer. She just nodded and produced a jar of peaches from under the floorboards.
And then what did you do?
I gathered these and came here.
Sean pours him another shot and refills the stein. Lord Ella enters the tavern with a complaining crackle of young women's voices from off stage.
I'll only be a minute. Hold on to your other's hands. Hans, I've been looking all over for you. I need as much wood as you can sell me.
That's Cinderella's job.
Hadn't you heard? The prince is locked Cinderella up in the palace. They are to be married.
Oh, that's very good news, isn't it?
Absolutely the reverse. My wife is making me take on all of Cinderella's chores.
Well, her sisters can surely help.
They are another disaster. Weirdly, a flock of birds delivered the news of the prince's engagement to our garden and then pecked out the girl's eyes. I am charged with keeping them out of their mother's sight at all times, so she won't be upset. They're tied up to the hitching post out front right now. Could we be quick? I have to hurry back and start the dinner fire, or there'll be hell to pay.
He notices the wood on the bar stool next to Hans.
This stack should be enough. I'll give you 100 francs for each log.
Your money means nothing to me. There's nothing to buy, to eat anywhere at any price.
What else do I have that you could possibly need?
My boots are so worn that the hobnails cut into my heels. I'll trade you a log for each of your shoes.
The shoes are exchanged for the 2 logs.
Barkeep, will all this money buy me a drink?
No, but your hat will, and that paper can rekindle the fire.
The ornate hat is exchanged for a stein of beer. Sean feeds all the money into the stove to stoke up the fire.
I used to know you, didn't I? Long ago, when people called you Jack, the giant killer, the story went that you were as rich as Midas because you had stolen from a giant a miraculous hen that laid solid gold eggs. How is it that you're now a lowly bartender?
Actually, it was a goose, not a hen. And the real story is rather an embarrassing one. Before I start, I want to make it clear that no giant was ever harmed in its making.
Cinderella always loved your, or should I call it, Jack's story, especially the last lines, which she turned into a little tune, which she always sang when working. Showing the melodious harp and selling the golden eggs, Jack and his mother became so rich that he married a beautiful princess, and they were happy ever after. What happened to all of that?
That was a twisted pack of lies patched on the end by storytellers to earn a better gratuity. Let me set the record straight for you. Times were a lot like now. Drought, famine, and widespread desolation. Of course, I was much younger then and was failing miserably to provide for me widowed mother and Milky White, the cow I loved since she was a calf.
Would you start with the once upon a time part?
I'd rather begin with that famous goose that was mistranslated into a hen. Now, mind you, all of this transpired after I had traded our perfectly healthy cow for a couple of supposedly magical beans. I couldn't face my loving mother after such a foolish and potentially fatal error of judgment. So I hid out for a couple of days. While in the woods, I was attacked by a goose. When I almost stepped on her nest, I wrestled her to the ground. When I spotted the 3 eggs she was protecting, alternative endings to my story began to populate me mind. A goose what laid eggs regularly for a dry cow wasn't a great bargain, but not as bad as the one I had made, and a goose that laid solid gold eggs would be the best deal of all. But since no one had ever heard of such a thing, it had to have come from some other world, where an enormous giant's castle might be able to hover above the clouds. Once the main elements were worked out, the diverting details were fairly easy. I had a bit of gold paint and a now tamed goose under my arm, and my mother brought the whole story. Of course, she couldn't resist spreading the fabulous news about her brilliant son to the villagers. The neighbors in turn brought us gifts of food and drink, just to marvel at the goose in her cage sitting on those golden eggs.
It's good that you got some food out of your trick.
It's good that you got some food. Oh, and I got to marry the most beautiful girl in the whole region, and she was certainly no princess.
I hadn't heard that part. How did that come about?
Within days, my giant story flooded the whole valley, and when the father of the most beautiful young girl in the entire province heard it, he stole a horse, swung his daughter up behind him, and galloped to our house. It took no more than an hour for him to negotiate my marriage contract with me mother. The girl's radiant beauty was all the prospects for greater fortune her family possessed, who lived huddled like field mice on their village commons. But for me, she was the kind of treasure that dragons protected, and worth any betrayal she might cost. We were married the next afternoon.
Hooray for Jack!
Hold back your enthusiasm, Hans. Before the evening's consummation, both our worlds would crack open like the painted eggs delivering their squawking goslings. So you see, Lord Ella, it was all a sack of noise and a fraud to boot. One that totally ruined me wife's family and nearly me own.
How does any of this explain how you got here?
I'm coming to that. I tried to escape our embarrassment by changing my name from Jack to Sean and carting all we had left to a distant village. My mother preferred to stay in the empty hut, and slowly she turned to dust. I, however, could not escape the punishment for my deceptions so easily, which was being lashed daily by her whip-like tongue. And instead of gazing lovingly at a beautiful woman's face, I had to stare at the stone face of an angry gargoyle. In order to survive, I attempted to master the art of servitude.
What happened to the geese?
Those geese did help us celebrate a few Christmases now, and planting those idiotic beans preserved what was left of our miserable lives for many years.
That's good.
You're really losing me now. How did that lead you to this tavern?
Spare me a few more minutes. The train of events is about to arrive at our destination. Now, nearly all of those beanstalks dried up during the next drought, and me devil's face of a wife spewed such venom that I decided to silence her by throwing myself in the sea. As I walked to the water's edge, I came across a deserted fishing net that wanted repair. This I braided and idly cast into the waves to see what fortune still had in store for me. The first time, all I hauled in was slime. The second time, all there was seaweed. But the third time now was the charm, and in my net was a golden fish as large as a child. But this was no ordinary fish. She begged and implored me in a human woman's voice to release her back into the sea. Starving as I was, I hesitated and did not say a word in response. She spoke on that if I freed her in return, she would grant anything I would so desire. In a voice that I used to use with my milky white, I said, "God be with you, golden fish. I don't need your golden ransom. Off you go into the deep blue sea. Swim free, swim where you seek to be." I released her and returned to the house to tell everyone about my wondrously strange encounter. When my wife heard the tale, she screamed, "Weakling! Were you too frightened by a mere fish from taking the offered reward? Return immediately and demand a cornucopia of a garden so that we will not perish when winter sets in. And one more thing, command that fish make me a mother without your touching me." So I went back to the sea, which seemed more troubled, and called out for the golden fish. She swam up and sweetly questioned if I lacked anything. "Have mercy on me. My wife is cursing and scolding me. She gives me no peace. Could you calm her with a richly fruitful garden so that we could survive the winter and also make her a mother?" "Oh, take heart, good man. When you return, you will find yourself and wife satisfied with what she desires." So I went back to my wife, but she was cursing more fiercely than ever. "Simpleton, son of a fool, all you got from the fish was a garden full of vegetables that I have to attend to night and day, as pregnant as I am." Go on back to the fish and tell her I don't want to be a lowly peasant any longer, but instead a noble lady with a castle and servants galore. I did as I was told, and when I returned, my very pregnant wife was standing on the porch of a grand house, wearing a coat trimmed in sable, and on her head was a brocade headdress, and round her neck hung gems the size of quail eggs, and gold rings circling all 10 fingers. Before her stood many zealous serfs and servants. She was caning them and pulling their hair for sport. I hope you've gotten all you want now, I said. Then her lackeys beat me and packed me off to sleep in the stables with horses and carved carriages fit for a princess. A week later, she herself came to the stables and slapped me awake. Get up, you good-for-nothing. The servants all bore me. I want to become Empress of the Sea with the golden fish as my attendant to present whatever I want without your constant delays. Take me to her right now. The moment we approached the blue sea, a storm turned it black with crashing waves and howling winds, forcing me pleading voiced into a yell, have mercy on me, golden fish. My wife will only be content when you transform her into the Empress of the Sea. I heard a voice coming from the waves. Lead her into the water and I will grant her wish. I did as I was told, and the fish slapped her golden tail on the rushing surf 3 times.
And what happened?
All of my wife's fine clothing and jewels dissolved away as if crafted out of salt crystal, and she was naked and smooth as a porpoise. Her snagging, chattering, even sounded like an angry porpoise's, and with the most animal sound I had ever heard, expelled her baby into the waters near the beach. I waded out to catch it and held a tiny, wiggling mermaid in me hands. The wife swam off out to sea, and the golden fish came closer and asking, would you give her to me? She needs her own kind.
What did you say back to the fish?
I said, I am her kind. And she said, no, you are not. You are a man. There was a long pause, and then she said, I will trade for her with something that suits you much better. Well, immediately I fell deeply asleep on the sand and woke up in the back room of this tavern with Sean's pub edged in gold on the front window. So you see, this tavern story actually began when I decided to pick up that goose in the forest.
John's story is interrupted by Candy rushing into the tavern to extinguish her smoking apron that has cookies stuck on it in varying degrees of burn.
Father! Kids, they'll kill ya. They just burnt my house to the ground.
Sean places a pitcher of water on the bar and she douses the front of the apron. Sean hands her a towel and pours her a water glass full of whiskey.
Can I stand a real drink for you? I'm Sean. These derelicts are Hans and Lord Ella.
Call me Candy.
Candy, will you have a shot and a beer with me?
Would you like to come home to my mansion with me? I need help with a few household chores and my stepdaughters, who you might have seen out front.
I would be most honored. I haven't eaten in days.
Candy drinks the shot and takes Lord Ella's arm as they exit. On the way out, he picks up the 2 logs he had purchased from Hans.
We will need these.
Candy takes his arm. Lord Ella walks out carefully in his socks.
What happened to your shoes?
That's a story not worth telling.
They exit the tavern.
Hans, you need to fly back into the dark woods to find your children.
Yeah, I will, if the fairy gods are willing.
Hans runs out of the tavern. Sean puts the rest of the logs into the stove, and the lights slowly dim to black.